To hell with the date on your birth certificate. Let's talk about what we have in common across generations. Life, sex, and tech at any age. Welcome to Age Blind with Nancy A. Shenker.
Hey, boys and girls, it's Nancy A. Shenker of Age Blind. And because we're recording in February, although you can listen anytime, and we'll tell you later how you could do that, we are focusing on what I'm calling the month of love. And it's not just love as in romance, it's also passion, it's also sexuality, it's relationships, it's basically anything that has to do with people connecting with other people. And they could do that in lots of ways. So that's all you'll see of, for those of you who are watching on YouTube, you saw my little smoochy face lips to kick off this episode. And today I have a guest who was a guest on my previous podcast. So I'm calling this Mind Your Manhood, Penis Power Part 2. Because how can you have a month talking about love and sex and intimacy without talking about all the parts? So we just did an episode with a sex coach talking about toys and clitorises and everything related to the vagina. So it seems only fitting that we now do an episode dedicated to the penis and all the man parts. So welcome, Dr. Paul Gittins. If you could just tell our audience a little bit about your background, what you do, what the name of your practice is, etc.
Thank you, Nancy, for having me on again. I guess that's somewhat of a compliment that I didn't offend anyone the first time.
No, hardly. It was actually one of the highest trafficked episodes that I've recorded. And whenever I would talk to a guy and they'd say, I'm listening to your podcast, I'd say, yes, what do you think of the penis episode? And they'd be like, well, how do you know that was the one I listened to? It's like, I know.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, I'm a board certified urologist and sexual medicine specialist. That means that after my urology training, I did a special fellowship or extended training in sexual medicine for men and women. We have centers here in Philadelphia and New York, as well as in Allentown, Pennsylvania. And we treat a gamut of issues. For men, we treat erectile dysfunction, premature ejaculation, pelvic pain, low testosterone, you name it. And for our female patients, we treat low libido issues with pain with intercourse, pelvic pain, hormonal management. We do it all in our practices.
Oh, great. Yeah. I know we've been focusing on penises, so we didn't really talk too much about women's health, but we could certainly touch on that, pun intended, as well, because it takes two. So in an episode that I just did about fun sex facts, I found an article from the NIH that said that the average erect penis size was 5.1 inches to 5.5 inches.
I think it depends on the culture. When in a lot of the articles, they look at different parts of the world and they kind of, they'll put different sizes on penises. So that's probably the average American penis, I would say. If you look at other parts of the world, they may be smaller, they may be larger. I don't want to shout any particular country out for one or the other.
Well, maybe I'll do a penis map infographic. I'm sure that would be well trafficked.
That would be perfect. And then you'll have everyone flying to one part of the world and everybody avoiding another part.
Exactly.
Even though it doesn't matter the size, let's get that back. Let's make it, for the guys that are maybe not as well endowed, they still, sex is could be just enjoyable for their partner. So it's not all about the size. They say the biggest sex organ is between your ears.
Amen. I totally agree with that one. But, I do think that a lot of men who have insecurity about performance, it can, as you know, manifest itself in lots of different ways. So let's just talk about testosterone for a minute, because I've been reading some stuff in the media that male testosterone levels are dropping. Again, truth, fiction, media, buzz.
Yeah, there is some data that shows that testosterone levels may be declining, as well as infertility levels may be declining as well. When you're looking at sperm counts over a long period of time, there's a large article in one of the major publications that indicated that. There's a number of reasons for that. There's error in terms of calculations. We measure sperm a little differently than we did in the past. But there is that kind of sense that possibly testosterone levels and fertility levels are going down. And one of the reasons for that could be because of, chemicals. It could be because of plasticizers. It could be we have these things called endocrine disruptors, which are things that we eat and drink that can hamper the ability to make testosterone or to make sperm. So there is an indication that, or there's a trend that might be true. Obviously, we need more data, and we need a large population to be able to say for sure that it's going down.
Make America fertile again.
Make America fertile again.
MAFA. That'll be
Yeah,
our movement.
But when you look at industrialized countries like the United States and England and parts of Europe, you do see a trend of decrease in fertility. But when you look at non-industrialized countries like areas in Africa and Asia, where maybe the pollutants aren't as readily like available, or they're not using as much plastic or some other things, the sperm counts have kind of remained pretty much consistent. So it's interesting when you look at the data in a whole.
Oh, yeah. And I'm a real believer. My listeners have heard this. I've been on a health jag for probably the last 10 or 15 years. My mother lived to 95, was sharp as a tack, but her body really declined pretty rapidly. She didn't exercise. She didn't really eat healthily. So I've completely started biohacking myself and just experimenting.
Yeah.
I have eliminated a ton of things from my diet, mostly food with a lot of preservatives. I've been eating fresh food. I've been upping my protein intake. And although the number on the scale isn't moving, I have lost 16 inches across my body.
Yeah.
Hopefully not my brain, but they haven't measured that. But, it's kind of fascinating because I think we're also learning more than ever about the aging population. And you have, men who start suffering from erectile dysfunction and low sperm count in their, 30s. And then you have somebody like Al Pacino who just had a baby at 89. So
he's special.
Yeah, he's special. I'm reading his autobiography right now.
Yeah.
So,
but as you mentioned, we do see testosterone levels declining in men, and is that a natural effect of aging? Possibly. We do see for most men, after the age of 40s going into 50s, we'll see a decline in testosterone for a number of reasons. One of the reasons that you start making more of a protein, it's called sex hormone binding globulin, that may go up, which binds your testosterone, which prevents it from getting into your cells. And there's a number of other theories why testosterone levels go down, sort of like an andropause as opposed to a menopause that women have, where their hormones will go down drastically. So we do see that over time. And, some men could be symptomatic because of that, obviously, depending on how far that drop in testosterone level is. There's some guys that, maybe when they're 18, their levels are, in the 1200s or 1000, and then they drop to 300. And then that delta, so that area in between the drop may be pretty significant in some guys, where other guys may start at, when they're younger, they may be in the 800s. And if they drop to like 400 or so, maybe that delta isn't as high. So they're not as symptomatic. So there's a number of reasons why we know that testosterone levels drop. And as a clinician, you have to figure out, one, are they symptomatic? Like, what kind of symptoms do they have?
And what are some of the symptoms?
So some of the symptoms, they can have lower libido. They can have some depression. So we do know there's studies where it's interesting. We always say in our field that if a person has depression, if they go to a therapist or a psychiatrist, they may be treated with an SSRI. If they come to a urologist that treats low testosterone, they may be, and they're found to have low testosterone, they would be treated with testosterone. So I always tell all my patients that if you have depression, make sure that you are checked for low testosterone, because that could be a cause of your depression. Other things that we see with low testosterone, like I mentioned, fatigue. Some guys have lower ambition, loss of muscle mass. You can have some fertility issues. You can have loss. It has to be pretty low, but you can have a loss of like body hair as well. But that's got to be pretty low. So those are some of the common symptoms that we'll see with men with lower testosterone.
And are most of your patients kind of self-motivated to come see you, or are they usually prompted by a woman in their life, or is it an incident where they just aren't able to get hard and they need to get that checked out? Like what?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all of the above. Today I just happened to see three guys that their wives were like, "You need to see somebody right away," and their wives looked looked me up on the internet and said, this is a guy to call. You need to go to him right away." Some guys do equate erectile dysfunction or difficulties with low testosterone, and it's not always 100. It's not always 100% correlation, right? So you can have normal testosterone and still have erectile dysfunction, right? And so there's not that 100% correlation. About 19%, we say about 19 to 15% of guys that have low testosterone and ED, that ED is caused by that low testosterone. The other guys that have ED, it's probably caused by something else, right? Because we know there's so many reasons why guys can have erectile dysfunction. It could be because of, hypertension, high cholesterol. It could be because of neurological reasons. It could be because of scarring of the penis. It could be because too much adrenaline in their system. So there's a number of reasons that guys can have ED. It's not just testosterone.
You mean it's not because they would have women believe that it was just because we're not that hot?
Yeah.
Isn't it our fault? Right?
It's horrible. It is so bad, So the excuses that a guy would tell because they're not able to have an erection, and it's pretty sad.
Well, it's got to be traumatic. I mean, I've never had a penis, but I would imagine, that if you are really like ready to rock and roll and then you can't.
Yeah.
Like
It's devastating. It's devastating. It's like your best friend is gone. It's I mean, you think about it, like when guys are smaller, and I have a son, and even when he was younger, the first thing he would do if he had he touch his penis, like that's what you do, right? You touch your penis, and it's like you're all reliable. And then what happens is, there's that one time where it's not, you're not able to function, and it really can destroy a person's confidence and their self-esteem. And it goes well beyond like just having sex. It's like being able to communicate with guys. A lot of guys that communicate with their penis, and so being able to communicate with your partner, on that level. And it's like for some guys, their power is taken away from them. It's pretty interesting, the psychology of the penis and the male. I think that should be the next book, right? The psychology of the penis and the male.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I remember in our last episode, which I encourage everybody to listen to because it's still up on YouTube, is how you talked about what a guy should do or could do if he's in that situation and discovers in the moment that he can't get hard. And, the sort of the etiquette of ED, which is something people should talk about a lot more because there is no official protocol for that. And it's awkward for everybody. There was a really, really funny episode on SNL, which I just referenced in my last podcast, where they got a guy to go to the doctor by telling him he was a guest on a podcast with a bunch of other guys. And so they're all sitting around like broing each other and talking about health issues because they did it in an environment that was kind of comfortable and acceptable.
But also when we're talking about ED and like, what should be said and how we feel, it's amazing how many women feel like it's their fault, that they're the cause of their partner's ED, that they're not sexy enough. They're not doing the right things in the bedroom or outside the bedroom. And when I have couples in my office, I always say, listen, it's neither of your fault. This is something that's happening and we just have to fix it, right? It's not the fact that you're not sexy enough. It's not the fact that you're not a good partner, or if it's a male partner or a female partner, it doesn't matter, right? But then we work through it and then we find a solution for them.
Yeah. And, the reality is the average life expectancy now for men is 84 and 87 for women, or will be, in the next few years. So I think, modern medicine knows a lot, but they also don't know a whole lot about how the body changes past the age of 85.
That's right.
We're just starting to crack the code on menopause, just because it hasn't really been studied.
Yeah, we need to. Yeah, that's a whole nother topic.
It is. That's a whole other podcast episode. But the two go hand in hand, literally, because they do a really good job, when you're younger in health ed classes, explaining the changes you're going to go through when you go through puberty. But there's not as much, when you're 45 and beyond, about what might happen to your body. And more importantly, what to do to fix it if things go awry.
Of course. And that's, I think that holds true for women with menopause as well as men that have low testosterone or ED, or, we see that a lot, that, when this happens, it usually happens by surprise, even though like there's tons of ED commercials out there, and the guys are like, that's never going to happen to me. Of course not. I mean,
Or
my
this has
penis.
never happened before, or it gets hard when I masturbate, but
That's
like, oh,
right.
must be you. Like, you must be too fat, or
It's not me. It's not me at all. And so eventually, I always feel that the older you are, right, the more likely it is to happen at some point. Unfortunately, for some guys, I see guys in their 20s. I saw a guy that was 25 today, and I also saw a guy that was 85. And so it can happen at any stage of life, really. But I think there's things that you can do to prevent it. And you talked about a number of things that you're doing, right? Exercise, eating the right foods,
hormone replacement
hormone
therapy.
replacement therapy. All those great things can really affect the erections. We're big on exercising, and the penis as well as like the rest of the body. There's a number of things. Eating the right things, like you mentioned, can help to prolong our erectile life as a guy. There's a lot of things that we can do and we talk about.
Someone was just telling me about electrical stimulation.
So we use it. Well, it's not. So we use something called core wave therapy,
Mm-hmm.
which is low intensity shockwave therapy. And core wave is low intensity shockwave. We just have our particular protocols that we use in our office that we know that are very successful. And so the way that works, the way core wave therapy works, is it stimulates these things called growth factors, which are these stimulatory kind of signals in our body that help to increase blood vessel formation in the penis, as well as it helps with like nitric oxide levels, which helps to the vasculature. There's a really cool rat study that was conducted out in California where they used this shockwave therapy on rats, and then they amputated the penises of rats, and then they found stem cells and new muscular cells there. So we know that there might be also some restorative properties that the shockwave does to the
You
penis.
just made every single male listener squirm when you
I
told
know,
that
but that's why I
story.
said rats. That's why I said rats. Unless they're a rat, then they should be okay.
Right. They're not doing this on humans, not to worry.
That's right. That's right. But the study, it was great, so we know that it works well, and with the right protocols, we get great results. Like I had a guy in my office, he's 76 years, a psychiatrist, and he essentially needed a penile implant, and we were able to kind of rework his penis, restore his penis. So now using shockwave therapy and a lot of the other things we do in the office, and so now he has to do an injection to have intercourse. So it's a win because then he doesn't have to have an implant, doesn't have surgery. He was like, no for surgery. So now his penis is functional, whereas before when we did the injection, it didn't work at all. So it's not, these therapies aren't penis transplants, but what I say to these guys is that we can kind of take you above, or take you to a level that's above where you are right now, and so being realistic with all the things that we can do, but now we're able to kind of transform these guys and really give them a restorative program that they're happy with.
And does everybody who sees you have a problem, or do people ever come to you, the same way you'd see an internist for preventative care? Do some people come and say, I want my penis to function well for the next
I
40
wish,
years?
I wish I would see more people that would see me for that, but most people come and see me if they have a problem.
All right. So if you don't have a problem yet and you live on the East Coast, you should definitely seek out one of Dr. Gitten's clinics because, yeah, I mean, the same way I go to the dentist, whether or not I feel like I have a cavity, or I go to the eye doctor, and I do go to the gynecologist, on schedule every year. And we talk about sex,
Yeah.
that should be part of the protocol. And I think part of it is that we're still living, we've talked about this on some of my other episodes, in a society that still is a little bit puritanical. And I think people are more open than they've been in the past, but there still needs to be a lot more dialogue about sex as we age, or sex at any age for that matter. Do you think that the widespread availability of porn is having any impact on libido or sexual relationships?
Oh, I think porn could be. I think porn. I think of porn in two different ways. I think that it could be detrimental. I also think it could be helpful. It could be detrimental when I think that men or women, when that's all they consume, right? It's all about porn. They're watching it like 24 hours a day, multiple times a day. They're masturbating to porn. They're all of their expectations are based on a movie, right? And or their penis size. I get so many times, like I do penile girth enhancements as well. And, when their expectations are like the guy on the screen, where he's, 10 inches long and 10 inches wide, you know, and, and so that can definitely hamper what you feel about yourself. How do you feel about your partner? Like, why isn't your partner screaming in joy every time you touch her and all these other things, or him? But I think it could be also beneficial. I think that for some guys, with masturbation, I think it could be a release for stress and anxiety that they're seeing in the real world. And maybe it's a little bit of an escape for them. And sometimes you can bring a partner into the porn with you. You guys can watch, they can watch together, and maybe they can be turned on together and maybe find a new move or two. Why
I was going
not?
to say that's the other thing that's unrealistic. It's like, most human body parts may not move that way.
May
So,
not move that way.
do not try this at home. This could
Yeah. But I think there's porn addiction and all these other things, but I think if it's used, I wouldn't say sparingly, but I think if it's used occasionally and in those manners that I kind of mentioned before, I think it can be helpful.
Yeah, and I love what you said about not comparing yourself to other people. Like I always watch the Grammys and, some of the other award shows, and I'm sitting there going, oh, I should look like, Kathy Bates. But, she's been shooting herself full of Ozempic. And I don't necessarily want to do that. I accidentally OD'd myself on semi-glutide last spring. And I'm like, well, this is not worth it. I mean, obviously, I've been properly dosed. It might not have happened, but Hollywood and the media puts way, way, way too much emphasis on this, ideal of what people should look like.
Yeah, Nancy, you're telling me that everybody's penis isn't 9 inches?
No, 5.1 to 5.5.
Boy, that's gotta be wrong, because the porn, nobody's 5.1. No, but yeah, of course, I think our society now with just, I mean, that's a whole nother topic, but with social media and everything, we're always comparing ourselves and everything. And it's not just the guys that are doing it, it's also women that are doing it as well. Women, I find that in my practice, like maybe men are watching it a little bit more than women, but women watch, close to the same amount of porn as guys do. And so expectations for them are different too.
I mean, Hallmark movies don't count as porn? See, that's a problem. You see, watch The Bachelor and these Hallmark movies, and that I've actually written about that. Like, you get a very, bizarre version of what modern love should be. In fact, I wrote a whole series about the Golden Bachelorette, kind of railing against that because they picked somebody who does not look like a typical 60-something-year-old woman. And it's clearly had a lot of work done. And, it's not healthy for us to be holding those people up as role models.
No, not at all. Not at all. I think we're becoming more and more aware of that. I'm hoping, because if looking back like 10 years ago, I thought it was probably 15, it's probably at its peak. I think we're looking a little bit different. Like, you're seeing a little more models that are full figured, and people are being a little more conscious, I think. I hope that trend continues to the point where, why can't the Golden Bachelor be like my mom,
Right. I know. I was very encouraged. I just started watching True Confession. It's how I relax. Guys, may watch sports. I watch crap TV, but I was watching The Bachelor last night, and there's a woman who's a plus size model. She's obviously not like obese, but she's thick, and she's made it into the second round, whereas in the past a lot of the full figured women were kicked off night one. So I keep applying to be on the Golden Bachelor.
You got my vote.
Cool. Just send in a nomination for me. But yeah, I will be the plus size woman on the show, and I'm average. I'm not like obese, but compared to some of the other women they cast, it gives us a very distorted body image view. And I just watched The Substance last weekend, that's a Demi Moore movie about aging and this woman's fear of getting old. It's really fascinating because it is very much a sign of the times. So anything else before we wrap up that you would like to leave our listeners with, both men and women, about sexual health, erectile dysfunction, testosterone, Valentine's Day expectations? Like, if you could just give some people advice.
I always have the guy that comes in like February 13th and he's like, I have a Valentine's date tomorrow. You need to fix me by tomorrow. I'm like, oh my God. It never fails every year. But what I always like to tell patients is that if you're talking about aging, there are age changes that happen with sexual function. And like we said, understanding what they are, but also understanding that they could be fixed. And the earlier you get to it, the better, right? I was talking about the guy that I saw in the office that he was already at the point by the time he saw me that he needed a penile implant. If he would have seen me like when he just started the Viagra or the Cialis, he'd be in a different place right now, right? So understanding what the symptoms are, understanding that there's help out there if you want it, right? If not me, with someone else. And the whole goal is to be able, if you're 80, to be having sex at 80, or at least being able to have a decent sex life if that's what you want.
Oh, I did have another question for you. Ejaculation. I've heard and read that as men get older, they're just either not able to come or they're able to come, but there's no fluid involved. So what's the deal with that?
So as guys get older, it depends, right? So there's something called anorgasmia. So as guys get older, for some men, it is a little bit harder for them to ejaculate for a number of reasons. Sometimes we think it's the receptor issue where they're not having enough sensation in their penis. It could be their hormones. It could be a number of reasons. It's not extremely common, but it does occur in a number of men, probably about, I would say, just to give a guess, I would say probably in like 10 or so percent of guys, I would just say. On the other end, there's premature ejaculation, and that's more likely to happen as in your younger years. It can happen when you're older, but it can happen more in your younger years, and that's about 30%. And that's ejaculating less than like 2 minutes, where delayed ejaculation or anejaculation is lasting more than 20 minutes or so, give or take. But yeah, it happens to a lot of guys. It's common enough where I see it a number of times. Something else that could be fixed. Success rates for anejaculation are, I would say in our practice, is probably like 30 to 50% or so, a little harder to fix. In terms of the volume of ejaculate, as guys get older, the volume that they're producing when they ejaculate does go down a little bit. And that's because of a number of reasons. We think it's because some of the prostate is getting larger and some of the glands aren't working as well. So that's one of the reasons why, for decrease in volume of the ejaculate.
I know I kind of threw you off course, but I figured we should come before we go.
Just That's true. I agree.
Couldn't resist
I love
that pun.
That's the first time I heard that, Nancy.
I just made it up on the spur
I
of the
love it.
moment.
I love it. I love it. A woman of many words.
Yeah, you can borrow that if you would
I may
like.
have to.
So preventative care we talked about, and for you women who are listening, remind yourself it is not you. I mean, it may be you, but
Most of the time, it's not you.
It's complicated. And
Yeah.
the other thing that I think we all have to remember, in this month of love and intimacy and romance, there is a difference between, intimacy and hardcore sex. And, I think for a lot of men, they have a very different definition of what sex is. But for women, and we make jokes about it, but cuddling, kissing, stroking can be as satisfying as doing the deed.
Yeah.
So knowing your partner is really key.
It's a time and place for everything, Nancy. Time and
Exactly. So, that's another good thing we should leave our listeners with.
And you're right. Understanding and knowing your partner is so important.
Yeah, which can only come, not to get all mushy and romantic, but, in a hookup culture, that's very hard to do because it's all about the act. Whereas if you're building a relationship with somebody, it's really about, as you said, what's between their ears as opposed to what's between their legs. Yeah. So if people want to reach you, Dr. Gittens, what's the best way?
So our website is Rockwell. The name of the practice is Rockwell Center. So it's Rockwell Centers with an S.com, or I'm on Instagram and Facebook at Dr. Gittens.
And that's great too, that you're on social media, because that is where so many people get their information these days, good, bad, and otherwise. But it's a good door opener. And again, if you're on the East Coast, or even if you're not and are willing to travel for good medical care, I come from a medical family. This is my second recording with Dr. Gittens. He really does know his stuff when it comes to the penis, the vagina, and all things below the waist. So thank you again,
Nancy.
and continue to listen to Age Blind. It's on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, on YouTube, wherever you happen to get your content. And because you will be listening to this after the launch of my new brand, the big reveal, drum roll, it is nancyaf.com. So visit my new website, follow me on Instagram. I decided to split my business brand from my personal brand so I can talk about all kinds of stuff like sex, drugs, and rock and roll without my clients seeing it, or they may see it, but that's okay. But I now have two different personae. And thank you again, Dr. Gittens. And remember, to all my listeners and viewers, be age blind. Peace out.
Yes.